Okay, my name is Tim Hitchcock, and I'm professor of digital history, and I am really here from the land of the silent dead. I'm kind of on a journey over the last 15 to 20 years from a body of historical practice as a historian, where you look continually at text, where you continually, if you like, imagine the past as a construct between your ears without the addition of hearing anything. And so what I'm going to do just over the next 10 minutes is really kind of take you through where I've journeyed from that land of the silent dead towards something that I hope looks like a place that can be sounded, that can be listened to. And what I hope to get out of this session and this workshop really is a bunch of advice. The suggestion earlier was that there would be a lot of translation going on. And what I very much hope is that somebody will be able to translate between that world of music and sound, that present contemporary world of automated listening, and my world of the dead text. And the place I started was with this. These are the proceedings of the Old Bailey court. And what we did over the course of the 2000s was digitize essentially 127 million words of text that purported to record everything said in that court over 240 years. He said, she said, they said. What we ended up with was 127 million words of transcribed material marked up in XML as a kind of structured account of the workings of the British criminal justice system. And at first sight, it looked to us brilliant. And then back in 2003, we thought we'd solved everything. And what we thought we had was, if you like, descriptions of everyday life, a way of accessing the everyday, the history from below that me and my colleagues have been struggling to recreate over the preceding 30 years. And it gets a lot of use, and it works, and all of that. But by 2008 or so, we'd realized that that process of simply reading the dead was missing a series of tricks. And we very rapidly moved towards a kind of distant reading, saying that, well, here we have 127 million words that we can actually deal with as a single massive text object. And in pursuit of that, we started counting words. And this is a scatter chart of 197,745 trials counted by the number of words in each of those single trials, and then spread across 240 years and distributed according to the number of words in each trial, from 8 at the bottom, there's 8, to 155,000 up there. And that taught us a huge amount. It was a wonderful journey. As, if you like, a close reading historian, it was for me an absolute revelation. But it also threw back on us a question. What was it we were actually looking at? What did each of those dots mean? What was a trial? And what could we do that was different to it? And the next thing that came up was just the sense, the realization, that rather than having simply a massive text object, what we had was 127 million words, of which perhaps 60 million were verbatim speech. Supposedly verbatim speech. And there were all kinds of problems about the process whereby speech is recorded into text and turned into something else. And so we went back to that XML, that massive text object, and we started marking up all that text. I'm a horsekeeper. I live in Milford Lane, Strand. I lost my watch on a Monday. I do not know the day of the month. It was between the hours of 2 and 5. And after we'd marked up that 127 million words, what we had was something we could pull out that was speech, in theory, described by the person who uttered it, described and divided by the crime that they committed, associated with the verdict and the punishment, associated with the place where the crime took place, associated with the home of the defendant. We had a massive voiced object in some way. And the question became, well, what do we do with it? I mean, as an old school text historian, I was completely uncertain. So the first place we went was say, well, okay, 3D modeling of the courtroom. if you're going to have a voice, you better know where it is being uttered, because that fundamentally changes how you understand any given utterance. And so we created the 3D model of the courtroom, which of course was torn down about 1900, and we had nothing but images and architectural plans. And we're in the process of trying to insert within that a soundscape that would allow us to, if like, listen more clearly to all of those different words. In the process, the very act of modeling it changed how we read every single one of those. Because it turned out what we thought of as a grand courtroom was tiny, was intimate, and theatrical in its layout, was dominated by layers and absolutely designed to govern how different voices were heard and what authority they had in that space. So we'd gone a step, 2 steps, if you like, towards pulling out voice and trying to find the space for it, and ended up with what felt like at least a multidimensional understanding of that place and space. But where we're at now is actually, well, where I'm at is at an absolute conundrum. What do we do with that material? How do we actually understand it? Are there methodologies that we can bring from other disciplines that allow us to take that strand of speaking and perhaps voice it in some way and use different ways of analyzing that voiced speech to unpick what is an artifact left to us by the silent dead? So far, we've broken out all the speech, we've tagged it for utterances, and have begun the process of analyzing its distribution across the centuries. In the first, that yellow line is the percentage of trials containing speech, which evidences a changing pattern of criminal justice. The next line is, the blue line, is the average number of utterances per trial, so the extent to which each of these trials is a conversation or a collection of separate statements. And there is evidence of change in that. And finally, the average word count per utterance, essentially the pattern whereby people decide how they're going to perform in this particular context. And all of it is really down to an attempt to find out how we can actually revoice and re-understand and play with and just use the words of somebody like John Ebenezer Martin here, who stood up in court in 1871 and interrogated witness after witness without counsel or support. There's a working class man able to actually stand up to authority. And I want to know what their voice not so much sounded like, but what voicing that meant to him and what voicing that meant in that theater of the court. And what I'm looking for today really is ways of perhaps using methodology of sonification to give a new layer of meaning to that text, and to really just explore alternative approaches that I'm hoping that somebody here will be able to advise me on, of getting back to that lived experience. Thanks.